So next patch in 5.3, there are a ton of banners. You have the new characters Moika and Sitlali, as well as the Chlorand and Olakina reruns, as well as this special Liyue themed Chronicled Wish, which makes sense because next patch is the Chinese New Year patch. I'm going to wait closer to the release date once we get more details before I discuss the new characters. Instead, today a lot of you wanted me to go over the Chronicle banner situation, updating you guys on my opinion on the states of each of the characters and where I think they stand in 2024. So for context, this video isn't necessarily for new players. I'm giving my opinions more for people who've been playing for some time, and you want my opinion on where everyone in this banner and the weapons in this banner stand. Also, I treat supports more harsher than DPSs, which I know sounds like the opposite of something that you'd hear from a content creator, but for me, people usually pull DPSs because you want to play them and you build your teammates and you build your account around that, whereas while sometimes you do pull supports because you like their design, but often you get supports to support your DPS. So the reasons why you get supports are more gameplay focused. And the thing with supports, in my opinion, when their utility gets power crept, then you just never play them anymore. Whereas with DPSs, people play all sorts of DPS. Whereas you might say some of these DPSs are strong or they've been power crept, but I play each and every of these DPSs all the time, regardless of whether they're strong or they're weak. I'll also say it's just comical at this point how bad Genshin is with skins and their refusal to put characters on banner when they have a skin at the same time. Even if there is a universe where you could explain Shenhe and Ganyu disappearing during their reruns and after their reruns, they're releasing a Hu Tao skin the same time as a Liyue banner for old characters, and you still have Hu Tao missing. You can't make this up unless you want to say Hu Tao has a death theme and she doesn't want to be associated with Chinese New Year. I don't know. Also, before we get started, remember one good thing about the Chronicle Wish is you can lose the 50-50 for the character you select and still have a chance of getting one of these characters. Yeah, sure, you could lose and get a traditional loss like keqing or Chi, but it's a lot nicer losing and getting a limited character like xiao, child, ganyu, shenhe, baizhu. Anyway, let's go through the characters. Now, baizhu, unfortunately, baizhu is just kind of outdated. This is because his main niche was as a really comfy healer slash interrupt resist support, mostly for Neuvillette. But then what Genshin did recently is they added a character like Xilonen, who not only has big heals but also has very nice buffs and damage increases to your team. For example, just looking at teams where people play him, these are the recent usage rate statistics. You've got Neuvillette, Kinich, Nilou, Chlorand. None of these is he a top option. Now, having said this, he still does have one thing going for him. Well, two things, which is his C2 and his C6, his constellations. And these are still powerful support constellations. You might not believe it, but it's true. Because check this, these support constellations make it so you don't have to play him. His C2 and C6 means you get his kit, you get his support without even needing to switch to him. And as you might know, when it comes to high investment teams, dolphin, whale teams, for example, Chlorand Aggravate or Neuvillette Hypercarry, a 0 field time support is strong because it lets you spend more time on your overpowered DPS. So overall, if you're a high investment player, he could still have some use, but for everyone else, he's a support, not a DPS, so he's not really recommended to strengthen your characters unless you really like him. So Shenhe, so as you can see at the moment, it's been 622 days since Shenhe's last been on banner. And even this first rerun still had some serious miles in it. She just isn't a character who runs often. But yeah, it's been over 2 years. And in fact, she shouldn't even be eligible to be on the Chronicle banner since she hasn't rerun twice. But Hoyo discussed this in their preview live stream and they admitted that rule was dumb and they kind of put themselves into a corner, so they ended up changing it. Looks like some people find that controversial, but honestly, I just find it pretty logical. I mean, at least they're admitting their mistake. So you can finally get Shenhe after a few years. Me, I have the receipts. I am an original day one Shenhe puller. Quite based, if I do say so myself. So how useful is she? Actually, one of my oldest theory crafting videos was about Shenhe and how she was underrated, since a lot of her mechanical advantages are hard to put on paper, and that holds up true today. And she's actually recently got a few new teams. Although I will say, as the cryo buffer, she definitely does not have as much buffs in her kit as Faruzan has with Animo or Chevreuse has with Overload teams. And on top of that, recently
we're back.
Can all
Javity 22. So Javity is also missing 2 stars,
which Shenhe again doesn't get to capitalize on. So you could say the minimum expectations for support buffers these days has risen massively. Now, as for her uses, since she's an old character, and this goes with all old characters, they do naturally get thrown by the wayside, and there are less people to playtest and theory craft with them. That's just a natural part of the game. But there is still this big misconception, which is that Shenhe did not and genuinely has never been power crept as Ayaka's best support. I know a lot of people do think that a team like this, Farina Charlotte, was better, but no, Farina needs constellations to compete, and even with constellations you could argue Farina Charlotte is more clunky and less rotationally flexible than a traditional Shenhe team like Shenhe Kokomi or Shenhe Mona if you can play without a healer. And speedruns also have the old teams coming out on top. Not to mention, even if you do have constellations on Farina, that removes the need for a healer, so you can play Shenhe anyway. But what's cool is it's recently been popular to play both Shenhe and Farina together, even without constellations, by playing a mono cryo team like this: Shenhe, Xilonen, Farina. This is actually one of Ayaka's most popular teams these days, but this team mostly works well in bossing or in content where you don't need grouping, or when you're fighting enemies who have permanent elemental auras like these lava guys. But as you can see, that's exactly what has been in the last few abysses, as Hoyo have been trying to promote Xilonen and trying to demote Kazuha. So it's cool that Shenhe Ayaka has another new team. Plus, Shenhe also has another team, which is her use with Chaska. Not just popular with Shenhe herself, but these are actually Chaska's teams, and Shenhe is actually one of Chaska's most popular teammates, as you can see here. Now, I do want to caution though, I don't know how well this team will age, being that they are releasing Liyue this patch, who is also a cryo support, but she is a Nightline character, and as we know, whether it's the scroll artifact set or whether it's characters activating more Night Soul bursts, Nightline characters are designed to work well with each other, so there is a good chance Shenhe will be ousted in this role. Lastly, I do want to mention Shenhe's use with ganyu. Shenhe ganyu melt was used in Dolphin and up speedrunning, but I feel like these days with the release of Xilonen just does this role better with ganyu. For example, this team, ganyu melt really does benefit from Xilonen's more flexible and longer lasting buffs. You can also play Xiangling here as well. Although I will say, if you're a C6 player, there is this incredible gameplay you can see with both Shenhe and Xilonen. This run is quite ridiculous and it does shred, but obviously this applies for only C6 players. This is my build. This is what I generally rock her with: Favonius, Lance, a Noblesse set with just a bunch of attack and ER. And lastly, as for her vertical investment, not much has changed. Her C1 is still very powerful. As I've covered in other videos before, it's still a bigger upgrade for Ayaka than getting Ayaka's C1 and C2. The damage flexibility is better and you get better energy regeneration. It's just better. I only got Ayaka C2 because I like Ayaka. I didn't get it because it's actually better. And Shenhe's weapon is still only strong if you already have her C1. Otherwise, you just play Fav. And even if you have C1, you also could get away with Skyward Spine with this super high base attack. And yeah, as usual, nothing's changed. Shenhe is still a support. You either get at C0, C1 or straight to C6, so there's not much to talk about here. But enough about Shenhe. I do want to move over to ganyu, and honestly I think I want to cover both ganyu and xiao together. I still play ganyu a lot. I basically play her every abyss. I usually use Aqua Simulacra, although you can use First Great Magic. And yeah, I'm really happy with these artifacts. I've been working on it for a long time. These are some nice pieces. Anyway, I get asked a lot, are they still meta strength wise? Can ganyu melt and Child International compete with the new DPSs and all the power creep that's came within the past year, 2 years? Not popularity wise, but strength wise, that's the question. And I think it's reasonable to say no, but kinda. First of all, Ganyu male is a bit weaker than Child, and they both don't have as much raw DPS as the newer stuff, but they kind of almost can compete a bit slightly below that, in particular Child. If you're good at the game and you practice the teams and you're well invested. This is because older DPSs were better balanced. They were balanced around being difficult to play and optimize if you wanted the best damage, whereas newer DPSs and teams, not only can they clear a bit faster generally, but more importantly, they take a lot less skill to play. I mean, even nowadays, not only just Neuvillette, but you're getting characters like Chaska, who is super easy to play as well. In fact, I would probably say that Ganyu and Child are easily two of the hardest characters to play well. A lot of people think Klee is one of the hardest characters, but honestly, I think Ganyu is a lot harder to play well than Klee. Ganyu is like a harder version of Liyue, and people already find Liyue too hard to play. One thing I highly recommend spending time practicing is something like this, which is learning how early you can try to attack. Don't wait this long. Learn good timing and learn how to dash cancel out of it. Not only is it better damage than doing it slowly like that, but regularly dashing out of it is what helps you play Ganyu without a shield, which is what you need to do in order to access her higher DPS teams. Otherwise, if you can't play Ganyu without a shield, you're kind of locked into playing older teams like this, at which point you're asking, are these older comfortable teams as much DPS as the modern new teams? If you want to play Ganyu well, you kind of do just have to learn how to play her well without a shield. Accessing teams like Nahida, Xiangling, Shilonen. Also, I've talked about it in previous videos, but in the majority of situations, you should be using her burst. Not only does it do damage, but it also helps with setups and self buffs her. Let me show you a quick example. So you apply cryo with Ganyu's burst. First of all, that gives you this 20% damage bonus here. But then what you can do is it applies cryo for Kazuha to swell, gets the double VV setup, cryo damage bonus. Then he can swirl pyro, and then your Ganyu is fully buffed up. Some nice juice here, some nice juice there, and the burst was quite critical to that. And over time, a lot of people just don't know this about the burst. So with the damage you lose here, plus all the things I mentioned, it's no wonder you might think Ganyu does less damage than she can actually do. Now we have to make it clear, I'm not saying Ganyu and Child do as much DPS as the newer DPSs. Don't misunderstand, but anyone who's in the speedrun community, or if you've watched a lot of high level gameplay, you'll know that these teams can still cook. But then again, that's if you don't have skill issue, let's say, they can almost compete. The average player, you'll get much more strength from the newer DPSs, because like I said, older characters are a lot more harder to play, and that's before even getting into constellations, because between the both of them, 12 constellations, the only good ones are Ganyu's C1 and her C6, and even then there's constant power creep with constellations. Do Child and Ganyu have anything new? I've talked about Ganyu's teams, but there are also a bunch of newer bows. For example, Linyue's weapon is pretty good, but it kind of requires Shenhe to get this second attack buff and to help it compete with Arca Simulacra. But there's also Chaska's bow, Astral Vulture's Crimson Plumage, nice name, which just has so much raw stats, it's crazy. Even without this swell reaction attack buff, I was looking at it the other day with Liyue and other bow characters, it's just so good. It just gives so much raw stats. Oh yeah, also, as I said in previous videos, do not get Hunter's Path for Ganyu. Even if you could, it's not on the current banner, but even if you could get it, don't get it for Ganyu. This weapon just frauds so hard with the theory that's saying that it's one of Ganyu's best in slot, because this requires single target and it also requires not using Ganyu's burst. It's just not actually that good in practice. A new thing with Child isn't really teams related, but it's artifact strongbox related, and you can now actually strongbox Nymph Stream. So a lot of Child mains have been going for 2-piece 15% Hydra at minimum, if not even trying for this full 4-piece set, since it was never good enough of an upgrade to directly farm for it. But now, since you can essentially get it for quote unquote free, it is worth trying your luck in the strongbox if you're a Child main. I know people are also curious if Mawika can replace Xiangling for Child. Honestly, I don't even think we need to wait until release to know that she probably can't. Not to mention, damage comparisons don't even matter, since In most situations with international, you get faster Pioneer hits with Shungling. Not to mention how this team works with various setups, and you might not be able to get that with a new character. It's just not a team that you can calculate just how good of a synergy this team has. But having said that, Moika's burst does look cool. Maybe it could deal some nice nuke damage. Anyway, overall, they're both DPSs. Would I recommend them? If you like them and you're willing to learn how to properly build and play them, then honestly, sure, I would. It's as long as you know it's not going to be easy, but there are a lot of resources to learn. Even for popularity in my Discord, I can tell you Child International is probably still the most popular team people play and discuss there. So in that regard, I do recommend him because his community is always thriving and it's such an active community. There's so much stuff you can learn and it's just a very engaging team to play and try and master. Okay, moving on, let's move on to keqing. Now I will say is, for one thing, you should never wish for keqing here. First of all, she's a standard character. Secondly, every anniversary they will give us a free standard character, so you can get her then. But let's just still talk about keqing. And she's still one of my favorite designs character wise, and with cool animations and super fun to play. But I will admit she is noticeably below the level of the current popular teams, if that is what you are looking for. Plus, it's been well known for a while, but you do need to vertically invest in supports for her in order to pack a punch. Not to clear the abyss, but to get impressive gameplay. That's just how it is. That's just what keqing players do. I've covered this before in speedrun videos, but you're looking at 5-star weapon for keqing and C2 Nahida minimum, and then ideally you also have C2 on Kazuha, potentially even Freedom Sworn on him. Now I don't like saying things like you need this or that constellation because people can take it the wrong way, but you guys will know that there are certain breakpoints where keqing teams like this get massive spikes, and like I said, these won't make her compete with Fontaine or Natlan DPSs at the same investment or anything. But if you have that investment, the damage is very satisfying and you can definitely get impressive gameplay. One thing I do want to say though, because I think this is a common opinion, but a lot of people do say that she is a lot weaker than Chlorand in Quicken teams. And I'm saying this as a Chlorand main. I've uploaded a ton of Chlorand videos before, and I even got this record with the Quicken team when she first came out. But I genuinely say that each of these have their own pros and cons. keqing can be unironically easy to play because of all the iframes she has, whereas Chlorand, you need to spam her normal attacks without interrupt resistance. For example, versus these triple Kenkis, I can tell you I failed significantly more with Chlorand than keqing, despite Chlorand having self-healing. keqing also works great with both Mistsplitter and Jade Cutter. They're both pretty similar. It just comes down to whether your build is better balanced with a crit damage weapon or a crit rate weapon. Whereas with Chlorand, you really want her signature. I used to use Mistsplitter before, but the thing with Mistsplitter is it performs suboptimally in Quicken teams for two reasons. Number one, you don't always use her burst and then normal attacks after, which means you're missing out on this buff, so you're losing one stack there. And then number two, she can easily be on full burst energy, which means you might also be losing a stack. This is either due to the team's very good energy generation or because you want to use her burst at another point. Plus she has more built-in crit rate than keqing, so it's hard to balance around a crit rate weapon. However, this is just Quicken teams. What makes Chlorand stronger overall is that she is also strong in other teams like a double Geo team, or more specifically an Overload team, and Overload with Chevreus is just generally stronger than the Dendro teams anyway, outside of very specific situations. Moving on to Xiao, first thing that comes to mind unfortunately is this being a Liyue themed banner means I'm assuming that also applies to 4 stars. And the thing with Xiao meta wise is you basically need C6 Faruzan, and Faruzan is obviously a Sumeri character. Now the way they worked around this, as you can see, they put Faruzan on Xiao's last banner. So I would say overall wait for a Xiao Faruzan banner. However, he usually reruns around Chinese New Year, but this is Chinese New Year and he's in the Chronicled banner. So I'm worried we won't actually get a future Xiao banner with Faruzan, meaning your best bet is probably waiting for Faruzan to rerun with a Shenhe rerun, which is effectively a Xiao support DLC pack. So if you want to be a Xiao main, you could justify going for him now, because we really don't know. You might end up waiting for him forever to come back. So how strong is Xiao in 2024? I do play Xiao a lot, almost every Abyss, in viewer accounts, account reviews, and occasionally my own speedruns. Again, I am assuming you have a C6 faruzan and a 5-star weapon on him. Assuming that he is one of the stronger older DPSs, like pre-front end DPSs. And yeah, honestly, I would say a weapon like Jade Spear or Homer is a big deal, considering he is a hyper carry like a lot of newer DPSs. So for example, a 25% damage increase for him is maybe a 20 to 25 damage increase for your entire team. That is a big deal, meaning a good weapon on him is a big deal. And also there aren't that many decent 4-star weapons for him anyway. Ideally you also have Shenhe and Farina, but as I said, we've learned they aren't nearly as essential as Faruzan, who kind of make or breaks Xiao's strength. As for what's new with him, it's honestly just how you can vertically invest in Shenhe. These days getting C2 R1 on Shenhe, or even just her weapon, is very popular, and things like this will be the biggest bump in your damage. Xiao C1 is also still pretty good, but his other constellations are kind of useless as always. Also, the fact that you can strongbox both Marechaussee Hunter and Vermilion is quite a nice improvement these days. If you're a dedicated Xiao main, Vermilion is the slightly better choice, given how it's better in the overall due to not starting off with poor crit rate. Plus, importantly, it works with both Jade Spear and Homer, whichever spear you're using. Whereas with Marechaussee Hunter, because it just goes so hard into crit rate, it's quite hard to build around if you're using Jade Spear, or even worse if you're using Deathmatch, I dare say. Lastly, you can even use scrolls on Faruzan now and move Tenacity over to Farina. With Noblesse or a mixed set on Shenhe, you can see a small increase in Xiao's numbers, although in the grand scheme it doesn't really change much, but that is something you could do. And lastly, I'm honestly not going to bother talking about Chi. I know there is the physical team with Cloran that I covered before, but as I said before, it was more of a decent concept team than an actual meta team for Cloran. Chi is also a standard character that you could get for free in the anniversary if you really wanted. Now let's move on to the weapon banners. So the big selling point of the first Chronicled Wish weapon banner was that they were cheaper than normal. However, recently obviously they buffed the guarantee system for the proper weapon banner, meaning that you only need 1 fate point before you're guaranteed instead of 2 how it was before. So until we get the full details, I don't know if there is even a deal to be had here. Like, what are they going to do, make it so you're guaranteed the weapon you pick? But that's not even getting into the fact that this is probably one of the worst set of 9 weapons you could ever pick. I'm exaggerating a bit there, but 5 of these are basically useless. The Geo weapons, Jade Full Splendor, Amos Bow. Calamity Queller, as I said, is good, but only after you've got Shenhe C0 and C1. Jade Kite is a weapon of all time. I have it, it has good stats, but it still ends up practically pretty mid, given how few sword characters even end up caring for a weapon like this. Just think about it. Let me do the filter. Most sword characters you use are probably supports / sub DPSs who are using a supportive weapon, or if they are a DPS, they usually want a crit damage weapon. Then you've got Jade Spear, which is just about best in slot on Xiao, but it's on the standard banner, and Xiao also has stuff of Homer, which is pretty similar to Jade Spear if you have it, but it's just balanced the other way with crit damage, which leaves Polar Star, which is best in slot on Child. But the thing with Child is Aqua Simulacra is almost the same thing, and sometimes even more preferable, since because it gives crit damage instead of crit rate, you can more easily optimize his burst nuke damage. Characters like Fischl can use Polar Star, but then again Aqua is better, and Aqua is also better on basically everyone else. Plus, in reality, Aqua isn't even that universal anymore, given how Natlan seems to be having this weapon power creep with all these stats that Traska's bow seems to give. So if you're a C1 Shenhe, Child, or Xiao player, then you could justify going for these, but any other scenario, I couldn't recommend someone put on this weapon banner. Maybe they do give a straight up guarantee with this, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, that's it for the video. Hopefully you found this breakdown helpful or useful. To be completely honest, although there are quite a few cool characters here, and a lot of them were popular back in the day, I don't know how many people are going to be pulling on this banner, especially with Arlecchino and Cloran rerunning, and then Mawika and Lali. But even if you aren't, maybe you still appreciated my insight. And yeah, you guys can look forward to future videos where I'll be covering the other characters coming out. And yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.